Let me now welcome the Honorable Carmen Yulin, Mayor, City of San Juan. Thank you, and thank you for your patience and for coming to visit us. Want to also, on a personal note, thank you very much for your insistence on a couple of points that are part of this, having to do with transparency issues within that audit, with the provisions, and the defining process. If PROMESA is going to be reforming the defining process for what essential services were. I mean, our visit with you in San Juan, those are points that you made very, very clearly to us, and so I appreciate that help. 5 minutes, floor is yours, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Grijalva. The presence of a board comprised of non-elected officials making decisions on behalf of Puerto Rico constitutes a de facto financial dictatorship. Thus, PROMESA must be repealed. The board continues to mortgage our future while acting on behalf of vulture funds. Our debt must be canceled. However, since the political will for that seems distant, it must be fully audited. Reaching payment agreements without this audit is simply catering to the needs of bondholders. We are satisfied an audit commission has been included in the draft. We suggest the committee revives the Comisión Ciudadana para la Auditoría de la Deuda as enacted by Puerto Rico's Law 97 approved in 2015. This would be a step towards restoring public trust and governmental accountability. Defines Section 201, La Junta neglected to craft their fiscal plan with sufficient funding for essential services. The board has strangled our limited budget to favor debt payment, disregarding the severe impact this would have on our people. The fiscal plan cannot be oblivious to governmental obligations to provide basic essential services. Our position is simple: the people before the debt. The draft before us is an opportunity to remedy this wrong by ensuring funding for essential services such as pension payments for governmental retirees, education services, health services, and law enforcement services. We submit that draft should also include, as essential services, municipal financing and transportation for the people of Vieques and Culebra. Financial recovery cannot come at the expense of neglecting to provide appropriate levels of essential services, for it is those who need these services the most who will bear the brunt of any austerity measures. The latest fiscal plan, which has been endorsed by Governor Vasquez, includes additional cuts to our pensions. These reductions will simply make it unbearable for many of our retirees to survive. Education is the strongest weapon against inequality and the true path to achieving social justice and economic growth. The first step is guaranteeing a future for our young people must be safeguarding our most important higher education system, the University of Puerto Rico and its 11 campuses. This committee needs to understand more fully that municipalities are the level of government closest to the people responsible for providing its citizens with essential services. The board has already reduced $350 million in municipal funding for all municipalities, thus limiting their ability to provide essential services for our citizens. We urge you to include a disposition in the law to create an advisory committee composed of representatives from municipal governments aiming to ensure this level of government is part of the solution. The current draft includes two dispositions which we vehemently opposed. Sections 11 and 12 call for the creation of a reconstruction coordinator for Puerto Rico and a revitalization coordinator for the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. Legal figures such as these would further undermine democratic structure of our local government. In the case of PREPA, we are concerned the proposed structure would concede incalculable authority to one person, essentially making this coordinator into super oversight board of one. PROMESA is a clear manifestation of the burden of colonialism. I appreciate the positive steps taken by this committee in trying to ease the pains caused by the enactment of PROMESA, but the truth remains. This can only happen because we are a colony. Until that is addressed, we will only be facing part of the problem. When thinking of PROMESA, this committee must answer a fundamental question: con la Junta o con la gente, with the people or with the board? The answer must be clear and unequivocal. Puerto Ricans before the debt. The people of Puerto Rico must not be asked to sacrifice any more. God knows we have sacrificed more than enough. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize my colleague, Mr. Soto, for any questions he may have, Madam Mayor. Mr. Soto?
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Mayor, for coming today. Wanted to get some follow-up. So you support the audit and having the full commission of different groups to be part of that, so you can get more community input into that audit. Is that correct?
I support the audit fully, and I would just revive a committee that was already implemented by the past legislature. Eduardo Batia talked about it, la Comisión Ciudadana para la Auditoría de la Deuda. This was, had input from various agents in Puerto Rico, and it made it more transparent and more accountable to the people of Puerto Rico.
More accountable than a PROMESA audit that didn't include a lot of those stakeholders, right?
Well, the problem with the members of the board is that some of the members of the boards were part of the problem. They were part of the process of ensuring that bondholders bought at prices that frankly were ridiculous, and now getting repayments or prices that are strangling the people of Puerto Rico. So when you begin with 7 people that are not mandated by the people of Puerto Rico, and on top of that, some of them were part of the problem that you're trying to fix, which again should be a problem fixed by the people of Puerto Rico, it becomes an issue.
And then, as Mayor San Juan, what kind of barriers did you face in drawing down federal funds and working with the Trump administration?
Well, it is no secret that President Trump and I don't see eye to eye. There is one thing that he said after the storm that we agree totally. He said he thought the entire debt of Puerto Rico should be repealed, should be eliminated, should be brought down to zero. That is the one thing and one thing only that I agree with President Trump. But we have not yet received, as none of the other municipalities, any monies from the CDBG-DR fund, number one. Number two, we are still waiting on FEMA to give us money from categories A, B, and Z. Some municipalities have not even been paid part of that. Mind you, for the people that are listening, those are the funds that we used in getting ready for the hurricane and in taking care of our citizens right after the hurricane. It is important to note that municipalities were the first level of support that people received and saw right after the hurricane. So taking $350 million away from municipalities for San Juan, that was $21 million less, in what is wrongfully called subsidies. It is not subsidies. It is something like municipalities earned $1. The central government took that dollar, gave 25 cents back, and now calls that a subsidy. So it's merely retribution for earnings that the municipalities had in the past and no longer have.
So a lot of us, including you and I and others, are concerned about having these 2 coordinators when we already have the federal board, fiscal board. So whether it's them or Core 3, or what do you think we should be doing to help speed up the funding, other than the obvious, which is we're holding these hearings to put pressure on the administration?
Well, this is an issue of political will. It's an issue of President Trump, first of all, not understanding what the relationship of a colony is to the United States, and secondly, frankly, not paying attention. He said to the people of Puerto Rico that the reason why help was not getting there, and this is a quote, because we are an island surrounded by water, lots and lots of water, ocean water. That was his excuse for not getting the help that the people of Puerto Rico needed. But the one thing is, number one, to put pressure. Number two, it's just to make sure that the monies that go do not go directly only to the central government of Puerto Rico, that it goes directly to the 78 municipalities, because it is the municipalities that know exactly what the people of their cities need and would support. In fact, we were asked, all of the mayors in Puerto Rico were asked to put forth a plan for CDBG-DR money, and the central government passed under Rosselló, and Wanda Vasquez has not mentioned anything to the sort. She talks about helping municipalities, but nothing has come through to ensure that the power really goes in the distribution of those funds to the municipalities. I've had conversations with the mayor of Houston, mayor of New York, mayor of Atlanta, and really this is an issue with mayors all over. This extra layer of FEMA and federal government suppression of funding going through the central governments rather than directly into the cities, it's a hindrance that really makes it really difficult to come back from a terrible, not one, two terrible disasters like Irma and Maria.
Thanks, Mayor, and I yield back.
Mr. McClintock, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think California and Puerto Rico share a lot in common. Ours are among the most beautiful and blessed parts of our country. Yet every year, more people move out of our state and more people move out of your Commonwealth than move in. My God, Puerto Rico is an island paradise. It's a cruise ship destination, for heaven's sake. People ought to be flocking to it and rather than fleeing from it. These aren't acts of God, these are acts of government. Lincoln once said that, the voters are everything. If the voters get their backsides too close to the fire, they'll just have to sit on the blisters a while. It's a painful experience, but it's a learning experience, and voters go away from that sadder but wiser. And I think the best thing that we could do for Puerto Rico is get rid of PROMESA, let the elected officials make these decisions, and allow the voters of Puerto Rico to live with those decisions for better or for worse. I think before PROMESA, voters were coming to these decisions. They were voting to change the government until PROMESA relieved them of this responsibility. What are your observations on this?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I happened to go to California for the first time this year. And we share a lot of things, except California is a state of the United States. That is your country. Puerto Rico is my country. We don't see, I am a citizen of the United States, but I am a Puerto Rican national. And that makes a difference in the way that we see things eye to eye.
If I could interrupt, it doesn't make a difference on your sovereign debt. California and Puerto Rico both assumed the responsibility of sovereign debt, and both in their constitutions pledged their full faith and credit to that debt. Your philosophy is people before debt, but it's the credit worthiness of a government that's that government's lifeline. It's what makes it possible to respond to emergencies and to finance infrastructure over the life of that infrastructure. The irresponsible issuance of debt to pay ongoing expenses or to pay for pension obligations is the fastest way to bankrupt a government and to destroy its credit worthiness. And that's not an argument for statehood. If that's what you're arguing, it's an argument for separation and independence.
I don't argue with statehood, sir, but let me tell you something. Governments make decisions. I agree with you. When the government of the United States decided to bail out Wall Street, that was a decision.
And by the way, a bad one.
Well, you think it was a bad one. So it is time to bail out the people of Puerto Rico.
Well, again, that's not an argument for statehood.
I know you're against it.
Let me ask you the same question I posed to the legislators. What would you do differently from PROMESA, other than renouncing your sovereign debt and destroying the creditworthiness completely destroy the creditworthiness of the government? What would you do differently from PROMESA? One
thing would be economic growth. We cannot have economic growth if we cannot control our economic variables.
Okay, for example.
For example, we have to have a conversation with our brothers and sisters from the Longshoremen's Union to begin repealing the Jones Act.
Amen to that.
Which makes it very difficult for Puerto Rico.
Sign me up for that. What other
that is number one.
Congress
Number two,
acted as an impediment to your economic?
Number two, Puerto Rico should be able to draw its own bankruptcy laws. It was in Chapter 9. In fact, I was in front of this committee supporting a bill by the then resident commissioner, Pedro Pierluisi, to enact that same legislation.
If I could interrupt you right
Yes.
there, no state has renounced its sovereign debt. You would be suggesting that Puerto Rico should be admitted with a record of simply
Sir,
dishonoring its
Sir, I do
sovereign
not favor statehood. I favor a process of a constitutional assembly for all the voices of Puerto Rico to be heard, similar to the one that you went through, and for Puerto Ricans to decide what their relationship with the United States would be. So I do not, please, voy a pedir la vuelta. It's an expression in Spanish. I am not in support of Puerto Rico becoming a state, which is why I mentioned to you before, I am a Puerto Rican national who holds
Okay,
a U.S.
I
citizenship.
get that, but anything else that you can tell Congress right now that it needs to do to get out of the way of Puerto Rico's ability to grow its economy?
100% Medicare and Medicaid parity. If we pay the same thing, we should get the same benefits.
Well, you want bailouts, I get that part, but
No, it's not a bailout. Say we pay the same thing, we should get the same thing. That is what the American dream is predicated upon, right? You work hard, you pay what you owe, and we have paid for Medicare and Medicaid. Again, we don't control our economic variables, so we should not be responsible. You invaded Puerto Rico, you put boots on the ground. You tried Agent Oranges. You tried Agent Orange in our forest. You tried the pill with our women.
I get that.
It is retribution.
I get that. My time's up, but I do want to invite you and the legislators who testified before you, any thoughts you have on what Congress can do to remove the impediments, the obstacles that we have placed in the way of Puerto Rico's economic growth, like repealing the Jones Act, which I agree with you completely. I'd like to hear.
Well, thank you, Mr. McClintock.
Madam Mayor, in your testimony and in both written and oral, you crystallized the dilemma, I think, for Congress, and certainly for myself, is how do you thread the needle in terms of providing the essential support that our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico have earned and merit, not only in the fiscal issue, but also in the recovery issue, and doing so with the instrument that's before us, which has been categorized and accurately as undemocratic, PROMESA. So how do you thread that needle? And so the discussion in the draft is how do you reform it to make it less onerous, potentially more democratic, and expedite the resources. Because we've heard today from the ranking member that this is a process in terms of status change. It's going to take minimum 5, 6, 7 years, given the timetable that was presented by the director of the Oversight Board and by the elected representative that spoke as well. So my point is that can that needle be threaded?
Yes, it can. One is by ensuring that full funding for essential services, and I agree with Senator Batia when he says the people of Puerto Rico should be the ones deciding what the essential services are. But there is a general consensus that pension payments should not be reduced anymore. Number one. Number two, the University of Puerto Rico, and I know that the proposed bill suggests an $800 million allocation of resources to the University of Puerto Rico. But we must ensure that all the 11 campuses are kept open. They're not only a source of education, but they're a source of income for different municipalities. Number three, Section 936 of the IRS Code should be reinstated. Why? Because it provides for Puerto Ricans to have economic growth. Number four, we should be allowed, and this goes to a different, what Mr. McClintock was talking about, but we should be allowed also to enter into international agreements with other countries. And the terms of that could be discussed with the United States. Number four, it is imperative and important that our people that pay the same for certain benefits receive the same benefits in terms of Medicaid and Medicare. Of course, I'm a supporter of Medicare for all, and that would be something that would be important to pass in terms of legislation. But this is the truth. It is true that the Constitution of Puerto Rico states that the debt goes before the people. But as we all know, constitutions evolve. And our Constitution, frankly, also, we need to change it to ensure that that needle that you're talking about is finally a thread. But 120,000 people still live with blue tarps. Eduardo was talking about 50,000 homes. 1.3 million Puerto Ricans need some type of help to put food on the table. 900,000 Puerto Ricans are either under insured or not insured at all. So if we do not take care of essential services and fund them, we are going to condemn the people of Puerto Rico to even more dire levels of poverty. That is simply unacceptable to us, and frankly, it is unacceptable to you as well.
Yeah, and the, I think, implicit threat, I'll use the word threat or observation on the part of, to some extent, the governor and the board, oversight board, was that in defining a provision of essential services, that the unintended consequence is that, or circumstance, that other government services that are not enumerated or defined, and I agree with you, the idea of the concept of the people on the island should decide what those priorities are, that are deemed not essential, you're therefore would receive the essential cuts. It's kind of an implicit threat if something's going to give, and obviously that's some work ahead for us if this is a provision that there is some support for going forward. So I appreciate that. The other thing you mentioned, and all of us have, members of this committee, many have visited Puerto Rico and taken the time to meet with elected officials and others. On the visits that I've had, it's been, to me, one of the most eye-opening was meeting with the municipalities and their leadership, meeting with the comunidades de base, the community organizations that are there, eye-opening in terms of how they feel kind of left out of this process, that it's done at a central level in Puerto Rico government, and then it's done at a federal level and no transparency. And some of the things about building confidence was directed at those municipal areas and those leadership and those community organizations where the audit, the transparency, the no conflict was to provide those groups some assurances that what is intended is actually going to happen. So
this is why we are suggesting to have an advisory committee at the municipal level, so that you can include NGOs also there, so that you could have that ear on the ground, because in fact, it is the municipal level that is closest to the people of Puerto Rico and providing those services. One last thing, Mr. McClintock mentioned President Lincoln. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Well, we're not going to consent anymore.
thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.